welcome back to another episode of You Are the One You Seek. My name is David, I'm the host, and today I just want to talk about something that's been really heavy on my heart, my mind, and that I've felt a lot of clarity on lately, at least for myself. These are always my personal revelations and my personal insights. They're not meant to be necessarily shared with anybody else in terms of shared in value. So if you're hearing it and you're going, okay, that doesn't really make sense for me or resonate for me, that's totally fine. In fact, that's great because we're all on these deeply unique journeys, and we agree to these wildly different circumstances when we come into this life that don't really make a lot of sense as a human when we're cut off from that information, when we're cut off from knowing our purpose in each individual life that we live. And so with that, we're going to have different things that resonate with us based on our particular journey. So if you're not on a trip for self-discovery and self-awakening yet, you might be really early on in your ego stages of development. You might be a newer earth soul versus an older soul that's been around a long time, like a light worker or maybe a star seed or any of these other terms you might have heard for essentially a more experienced soul who's kind of been through a lot of different forms already. And even though time is really non-existent in our true form, we are kind of slowly trickling into these different physical realities, not all at the same time. And so I'm saying all that in a very long-winded fashion as I normally do, because you might hear what I'm saying and think, that's the deranged rantings of a lunatic mind. Why would I listen to this person, take them seriously, or value anything they're talking about? And you know what? I could never convince you of that. I could never persuade you to believe that, what I'm speaking from the heart might have some shred of credibility to it. That's entirely for each individual to decipher. So with that being said, the main thing I want to talk about today is this idea that you have to pick a side. I've heard it so much lately that it feels like it's being sort of impressed onto my heart as this idea that I need to challenge more and more outwardly. Because I think when we are pushed into these ideas that we have to pick a side, it becomes the perfect catalyst for the situations we have now where we're just so polarized, divided, and unable to see each other on any kind of common ground. I mean, no matter what you believe about reality, there has to be on some level an inkling of thought that we're all kind of from the same material, right? Whether you're a materialist and you believe that we're all stardust and only that, or you're religious or spiritual and you believe that a creator made us all the same. There's a lot of different belief systems that feed into this idea that we're all kind of one in some way. And so I do see a fair amount of commonality in people describing how we're all created kind of as one or equally, but we get into all these ideas that based on your culture, your religious beliefs, the way you talk, the way you look, the way you dress, the way you carry yourself, these are all perfect identifiers of your worth as a person. And they're all open to endless scrutiny and judgment because the ego is so enamored with this idea of maintaining this separation that we're in. It doesn't know any different because the ego is our creation. It's a necessary vehicle to navigate these lives, but it's also, when out of balance, our enemy. Because it keeps us bound to these ideas that we're merely only existing here and now, and that there really isn't any fun to be had. It's going to be rough. You're going to have to fight and struggle and scrap to understand your purpose or why you're here, or what any of this is about. And I don't believe that that is at all the case. And so when I hear things like, well, you got to pick a side, if I'm talking about a political issue or a global economic issue or agricultural, I mean, you name it. And we, of course, see this in our electoral systems where we're pitted into A or B and it's the lesser of two evils. And it's so crazy that it's become that reductive now that we have to dumb it down to that. But it's always really been there. It's just lately it feels more like an escalation, maybe a last gasp of the ego, dying throes of power, domination, and control. And so it's going to look really crappy before it's all done. But at this time, it seems like we're being forced even more into you got to choose A or B. And if you don't pick A or B, you're labeled all of these horrifically disparaging things. Now you're really supporting A because if you support nothing, it only supports A because of, trust me, you know what I'm kind of getting at here. I hope at least that it's so hard to just say, you know what, I have an individual view on this that's not really going to conform to any preset agenda or any particular person's expectations of what camp I fall in or what I should fall in or what's in their eyes the right judgment to make. We are all in charge of our own judgments. I even believe that when we die, we become the judge, jury, and thankfully not executioner, but the judge and the jury of the way that we lived our lives, because we see it again in a replay. But not only do we see ourselves in the replay and we're basically reliving it, we feel it like it was happening, but now we feel and understand everything that was going on in the minds and hearts of the people that were around us. So everyone we impacted, positive or negative, we see every single ripple effect. That person might have, you might have said something really hurtful to a person that you love, and because there was so much bond there was a deeper sense of betrayal in what you said. And they carry that with them for maybe hours or days or weeks or years. And it can have such a damaging effect. And if we really understood how powerful our thoughts, our intent, and our energy is, we wouldn't just casually throw it around with these ridiculous judgments and reductive thinking and categorizing everything into A or B, black or white, good or bad, righteousness and sin. I mean, there's all these different extreme polarizations that we can turn things into. And I believe that's the trick of the ego, to convince us that that's what you have to do. Pick a side. Pick A or B, or else you're shit. Or else you're a failure. Or else you don't function right in this world or this society. Or else you're an outcast or a black sheep. It's so difficult to be an individual in this world because it's so discouraged on every structural level. Schools, governments, anything that's structured that we have to basically conform to its system is usually a very left-brained system. It's about order, control, and judgment. For me, especially, school was always such a difficult undertaking because it wasn't about learning the material. It was about how I fit in with everyone else and how different I felt all the time. How much I stuck out like a sore thumb and tried to use my sense of humor to win people over. And, it worked. A lot of people told me I was really funny, should have been a stand-up comic. But a lot of that humor was very pointed and very judgmental because I didn't know how else to make people laugh without aiming it at someone else's expense. And I know a lot of comedy is about, jokingly roasting people or whatever, but there's a fine line there that I'm not sure I was balancing too well. And I hurt a lot of people, and I'm sure in my life review, I'm going to see all those times where I thought I was making a really funny, snarky remark that the other person surely wouldn't take personally, and I think I underestimated my impact because I didn't think much of myself. I did get into that with my tribute episode to my brother, how it took me, and it's still taking me a long time to find self-confidence, find self-worth, to be proud of my very unique individuality and my contribution to this world. I still have imposter syndrome with everything I try and do. I am a deeply uninspired musician. I play all these instruments and I really love music, but I compare myself to everyone else that I've known or that I admire and say, you're never going to reach that height, and that's the only standard that you can meet and be happy with. And so when I've tried to make music, original music, I didn't give myself even the patience or time to suck and to suffer and struggle through bad songs and reductive approaches. I just took the very first things that came out and said, this is bullshit. You have no talent at songwriting or creativity. But I was framing all that around, you have to be either this big thing or nothing. A or B. Binary choices. Pick a side, David. You're either going to be a world-class musician or you're never going to touch an instrument in front of people and embarrass yourself. Now, I did toe the middle ground. I played drums for church for over, I don't know, probably 20 combined years between churches that I played at. And there was a huge bitterness in me when I walked away from my faith, that I had squandered the best years of my life musically to something that never ended up being what I thought it was, and something that didn't really give back the way that I gave. And so many instances of deep betrayal. I'm talking deep betrayal, pedophiles around me. I literally, my first church that I played drums at, a little church not far off of Gig Harbor, Washington. I don't think I need to say the name. But there was some deep, deep trauma that happened there. And there was the first time I played worship music with the church was with a music leader there who had done unspeakable things to children, to boys. And this was not an isolated case in this church. This was a small church, maybe 150 people, 200 people tops. And there was 3 or 4 that I knew of, pedophiles or deviant sex criminals, really. And at this point, of course, I don't hold any judgment towards people who are going through, a sex addiction or something. But when you are abusing children in the name of God, I still don't know if I have the capacity yet to forgive that fully in this mentality. I know I will be able to when I leave this body, because I'll see it for what it is, that we're all on this wild roller coaster of experiencing every extreme possible. For what purpose, I don't quite know yet, but I have a trust that it's designed to allow us to grow into the creators that we are, that Source made us to create. And we first created all of this because, well, it was our first hack at it. And there's a lot of really cool shit out here, right? The universe is incredibly large. There's a lot going on. And we have so much to explore. But within that, we're having to live out all of these extremes and polarities to understand that when we have our full power of creation available to us again, after we're done with this little simulation we've created, then we'll know exactly, based on experience, what kind of worlds we want to create. I do believe we get to create worlds. We get to create whatever we want. We have the same exact attributes and power of Source. But since we were created by Source, we are still, we're connected, but we're not the original. But I think in Source's eyes, it's the same difference. They don't see us as truly separate. We're all connected through love, which is the only real thing. It's the only true emotion or creative force that exists, because love only gives, and it can only allow things to be as they are. It does not require anything back. It does not have a certain vision of how things should be. Of course, it wants to see love resonate everywhere, but without any organic learning of what love is, we're just programmed to love, and we're just robots. We're machines. It's sort of that whole thing that I used to, agonize over as a Christian, like, well, where's the free will come in? And there's all this stuff about, there's all this stuff about predestination, and, half my friends were dabbling in Calvinism, which is just an idea that, again, we're pre-selected. There's only a certain number who will be allowed in. The rest were already known to have fallen and end up in hell. Like, God basically created people knowing that they would be permanently in a torture chamber. I'm like, oh, that's bleak. But I was kind of at that point at some level. And now I think, what an insanely humanistic, ego-maniacal viewpoint. It's like if you have children and you want them to obey you and follow your will, and you love them so much, you've poured out nothing but love into their lives, but then they decide to disobey you on any level. The Bible is very clear that sin is a sin is a sin, right? We've all heard that one who were in the church, that Doesn't matter if you swear or you murder somebody. It's all the same in God's eyes. Really? And so it's like if you had a beautiful child that you raised and loved, and then one day they decided to disobey you just in the slightest way. They took $5 out of your wallet. Your punishment is, I'm going to shackle you in the basement. I'm not going to feed you except for what's absolutely necessary for you to survive, so you can experience the darkest and deepest levels of pain for as long as possible. I would do it for eternity if I could. What the fuck is that? What parent would ever create a human life? And I know there are examples, trust me. But out of a place of pure love, what person could create a human life and then quickly develop a sense of vengeance and anger and hatred and just want to destroy it? Say, you know what, I regret ever having made you. I mean, think about the flood. I believe there's been many global floods. The Earth's been around a long time. There's been a lot of cataclysms, floods. We have a lot of evidence for major flooding. I used to think that was BS, and Christians just made that up. But no, there's some pretty good evidence for massive flooding. But to think that was God's, the creative God who made this massive, infinite universe, is so limited that when his creation disobeys him, instead of allowing it because love allows all things to figure it out, it says, nope, you're done, you're out. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't correspond with anything other than the human ego and the desire to see separation and othering and judgment and choosing A or B. But Source doesn't make us choose A or B. Source allows every friggin' letter we want to invent. And the good news is we always do have that tether back to home. I've mentioned this in my first episode, I think, that, when we, maybe it was the second one, I don't know. But when we come here, we never are capable of becoming fully separated or lost from our source. That is impossible. And that's part of what this is getting into some stuff down the line, but that's sort of the function of the Holy Spirit. And I know that's triggering if you were like me, an ex-evangelical or, atheist or whatever. Like, Holy Spirit, come on, man. But we are all spirit. We are made from Source, which is essentially light, love, and spirit, and that's what we are. But in order to have a guide here while we're in these meat suits of various types, we did need some comfort when we die to guide us back towards this remembrance of what we are. So the Holy Spirit's function is to be that loving, nurturing energy here when we are struggling and suffering. And it's not that it's going to just apply that instant pain relief and that instant gratification we're looking for when things really suck here. That's what we want. That's what our ego is telling us. If the Holy Spirit was real, it would bring you comfort right now. But the Holy Spirit is just that consistent stream and river that runs through us that we feel on a deep level is guiding us towards the right instincts and decisions and energy to embrace. And it sometimes gets so lost in the absolute chaos and madness of this world that you forget it's even there. You just disregard that part of yourself because you think there's zero that's redeemable within me. Because our ego is identifying with all these false notions we've created. But the Spirit is that consistent part of you that doesn't give up, that doesn't stop pushing love into your heart and mind. Not pushing, because love doesn't need to aggressively push anything, but just consistently delivering that loving message of you are enough. Within you is all of the power of Source. You are infinite. You are a creator. You just came here because you kind of wanted to have an experience. That sounds so reductive to us. Like, really? I was in infinite glory and I decided I wanted to come and do this? To be in a body that's breaking down constantly, where I'm, on the toilet half of my life or whatever, which that's the title of my autobiography, I believe. TMI. Seriously, though, there's all the, on top of numerous other odd ailments, you wonder what is the Why would we do that? Why would we want to come here? But I heard a really great metaphor for that on a podcast I was listening to today with Betty Guadagno, who I'm crossing my fingers. I'll have her on the show really soon. She has an incredible story. But she likened it to this idea that, when a mother is going through the growth stages of her baby inside her body, there's all this very uncomfortable, very deeply traumatic stuff happening. It's very painful. In some cases, just nonstop sickness and misery for months. And then you have this baby and you're just so overwhelmed with the joy and love of this thing that, eventually you decide to do it again. And you do it again, and you do it again. And some people do this a lot of times, and we might say, well, they're masochists or whatever it is. But truly, that's what we're doing here. We just knew that we could have this crazy experience that we could ultimately choose what to do with, but it was going to be really, really painful for a long time and feel like, what is the point of all this? And then when we reach that climax of joy, when we awaken not to the physical world like a baby, but when our spirit reawakens after we're out of these bodies, it will feel like, well, this was worth it. Look where I'm at now. Everything's okay. And all those painful experiences are going to be not assigned to me forever. Those will all be wiped out at the atonement. And the atonement is, again, I'll talk about this a lot. The atonement is the concept of, after we go through all of these journeys and we finally decide to remerge with Source in our spirit form, we are able to distill out all of the good experiences that were basically fueled by the Spirit and delete all of those horrific pains and anger and anxiety and all the times we committed dark, evil things against each other. All of that gets erased. It all gets destroyed because none of it was real. It was only a product of our illusion, of our ego's illusion of what this whole thing is about. And so the ego isn't meant to be something that you kill. And, I was on that quest a few years back. I went and was speaking with a cognitive behavioral therapist, and I told him I wanted to kill my ego. And he's like, dude, you shouldn't do that. You kind of need that to live. I was like, what do you mean? I mean, my ego is what makes everything about me and makes me self-centered and makes me not tune into the people in my life that I love. He's like, well, yeah, that's true, but if you don't have your ego, you're just going to die because you're not going to have any instinct to survive or take care of yourself. Your ego is vital to continuing the physical experience. What he didn't get to, and what I'm kind of understanding more now, is that the ego is meant to be balanced. It's not meant to be allowed to grow out of control and dominate your mind. It's going to be there, so you can't just kill it, but you can find a balance between spirit and ego, because that's really the only choice we have as humans in these forms, is to strike as much balance as we can, because we're not going to be able to transcend the ego as physical humans. That's only something we do when we leave the body. And maybe not even then. I think our souls are still wrapped up in sort of the ego games of the cycle of life and experiencing all these things that, I still don't really know exactly where I land on that. If it's necessary or if it's just, again, something we chose because why not? I've heard, there's a guy I listen to every once in a while that I really, I do like a lot of the things he says. Sometimes I'm not, in full agreement, but that's what I'm always saying. Don't pick A or B. Take the good, filter out the bad, and don't use it as fuel for judgment. So his name's Michael Meerdad, and he, I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe the name of the organization he is with is the something Center for Christ Consciousness. I can't remember the full title, but he talks a lot about Course in Miracles and the Christ consciousness, which is just the love energy of what we achieve in the future when we basically awaken to who we are and we finally stop doing all the war games and all the other bullshit here that is just a massive painful distraction. That awakened state of us is the Christ consciousness, and it's just a love energy. It's a love energy field that is outside of time and space that we can tap into now, because it is we're tapping into a part of ourselves that isn't restricted by time. It's completely outside of time. And so that, to me, was what Yeshua was here to spread, was the Christ consciousness. Not, I'm Christ and I am the only one who can save you. So, and I'm not going to go down that whole rabbit trail again, but all right, so anyway, back to Michael Mirdad. He once had a whole message about soul contracts and how we're in this loop because we think we have to be, and we've made all these contracts with other souls about, okay, well, I'm going to do this to you, then you do this to me, and then we're going to go over here to this other planet, we're going to do these other things. You know, we have all these contracts we make with other souls about the experiences we want to have. So it does reframe the whole victim offender thing, because we're not actually just being attacked by these outside energies and outside forces that are unknown to us. Everyone we meet in this life and have any kind of good or bad experience with, we've basically made a contract with them at the soul level, so that there is no just chaos. The chaos is somehow organized. It doesn't make sense to me exactly, because you see just so much repetitive darkness and cycles of war and all these things. Like, why would we keep making these contracts? But again, I think we all need these experiences at different levels to fully appreciate what we have in our true state. And beyond that, again, we're here to learn all these things so that we can create new and beautiful realities to explore and enjoy. It's not just a pointless game. But Michael Mirdad was talking about how you can step off that ride anytime you want. The ego cycle, or the karmic cycle, the karmic wheel, that we're all going to ascend off of it eventually, but you can literally choose at any point to be done with it. So when you leave this life, you literally have the freedom to say, you know what? I think I've done enough in these physical forms. I want to go back home now, please. Not even, you don't even have to make a request. You just have to remember, again, the fullness of your spirit, and you have the power to do that, to go back. No one's holding you here. No one's forcing you. Source isn't punishing us and making us experience this. We chose to be here. And I really think that's an important distinction to make, because it takes out the sting of that we're victims, that we're, somehow the pain that's happening to us is a punishment for something we've done. How liberating to just go, no, I'm not guilty. I am not dark and evil. I'm not unclean. I'm not unworthy. I am exactly the thing I'm supposed to be. And all of this that's happening is just one tiny iota of my creative energy being fractionated into this little point of light. But beyond that, I am this immense ball of endless love, light, energy. So yeah, and maybe that's a little too A or B, right? Either commit to the physical cycle or go back home. But I think we get to explore everything in between that. I think in these physical realities we create, and even the non-physical ones we create, because when we ascend past the long cycle of physical lives, not just human, but other species on other planets, we ascend to a form that's basically our light body. And the light body is a heart-based existence. We're not attached to the ego any longer. We're slowly making our path back to home. So I really think we designed something that was really, really difficult at first, but then the majority of it is this wonderful ascension route of just constantly ingesting new and profound knowledge about who we are and what we're capable of, and finding new ways to express love. That's what I think our future is. That's what I believe in my heart. And that's what I believe we're going to hear on future podcasts, where I have guests who have experienced a physical death and seen all of these things and come back to tell us about it. And of course, it's easy to be really cynical about that, right? And say, well, sure, I'd love to make up a story too and get attention. It ain't that simple. Most of these people who have had these experiences were ostracized, pushed out. Many have actually taken their own life because they were so overwhelmed with the pain and stigmatization, especially in religious backgrounds. You're told that that's a lie from hell. There's no way that that's going to happen. We know what the Bible says. So don't you dare tell me that this is wrong. It is not an easy ride to come back, but there have been so many brave souls, and I am so excited to be able to talk to them. I had on a guest this week earlier to record my first podcast with a guest who had an NDE, Mary Helen Hensley. She's a fantastic person and just an amazing story and just so much energy. And we had a few technical issues and we lost the whole thing. So I am trying to get her back on, but understandably that was kind of a big letdown and waste of time, at least not for me, but for her. I felt like it was, I felt guilty for taking an hour of her life that didn't end up anywhere that was, useful to anyone beyond myself and her. But you know what? That's another problem where I'm, again, trying to make too much out of something that can be just what it is. The exchange that her and I had was really enlightening for me. I really, really loved talking to her. And maybe it was a good practice run for when I talk to her again and actually have some better questions and maybe a better flow. And we were a little rushed. There was just kind of a lot going on that made it a little difficult. But I'm going to have, hopefully, her back on. I definitely have a couple other people I'm lining up that I'm praying doesn't fall through, or else maybe this podcast was not what my plan was. Maybe it was something my ego's forcing. Who knows at this point? I still don't have direct revelation, so I'm going on a wing and a prayer here. But I want to have people who have had, I'm going to have people who have had these experiences on to talk about the incredible unity of experience. Everyone has their own very unique journey, and they have things that don't happen in the same sequence or even look the same or feel the same, but there's usually always the complete embracing of love. People talk about the 360 vision they have, seeing dead family members, but there's no either physical form, or if they see the physical form, it's them at the peak of their youth or whatever. But that's only just kind of an orientation thing. We're really balls of energy, like balls of light. These light beings, these orbs of light. That's what we are in our true form, and then we basically form into, whatever else. So we don't actually see each other as we appeared on the earth, but we understand each other because we energetically have made a connection, and that energy doesn't go away. It doesn't dissipate in our minds. We then feel that direct energetic contact. So people talk about seeing dead family but not physically recognizing them, but as soon as the ball of energy came up to them, they recognize, oh, that's my grandma. And then there's a direct telepathic communication happening. Everyone talks about the telepathic communication, that nothing is verbal. In a few rare cases I've heard about verbal things happening, but again, many of those experiences are tailor-made to what we need to acclimate to this pretty big adjustment coming out of the body. But there's this consistent message of a completely unified love, a connection to all things, all people, all energies being truly united. And just that there is no need to create division, separation, and religions and these false ideas about who we are that bind us to so many, again, polarizing negative places and attributes, and these things that push us into all these extremes and these deep polarizations. And we need to just question that. I think we need to look at, is this thing that I feel in my heart is the right thing to get fired up about and spend my energy and time on? Is this bringing about a positive change in my life, or is it just heaping misery onto me? And this is something that's really been hitting home for me too lately. This whole pick a side, David, is also how I've been interacting with the world on social media. I get riled up about, a take on politics or global foreign policy, and just a number of things that I see so clearly to me, the negative side of it. And I want to shake people awake and say, don't you see how messed up this is? Let's stop doing this. We have to be better. And there's nothing wrong, certainly, in speaking out your truth and what you're passionate about. But when you let the hatred and the anger penetrate your peace of mind and only steal your energy from the ones who love you, that are around you, what are you really doing that's accomplishing any good in the world to change those things that are breaking your heart? And for me, I'm so tired of letting my heart get broken by all of these things that are outside of me that then directly affect me and my family and my friends and the people around me. It's not worth it, and it's accomplishing the opposite of what I was hoping for. I figured, well, if I wear this on my sleeve and people see how heartbroken I am about it, maybe they'll want to do something about it too. And again, I'm not diminishing people who are taking up causes and speaking out passionately for them. We need that too. We definitely need that, because we are called to love those that are being oppressed and hurt. But when we get so caught up in the energy of hating the side that's doing the oppressing, we kind of lose our steam or our focus on loving those people who need the love. And I think that's where the change is going to happen, when we finally switch from, well, I'm going to love this group while I'm just seething with rage at this other group for causing this group to hurt. We just perpetuate the energy of conflict and anger and the extremes of ego. And we're here to balance. We're here to balance that stuff. We're here to basically find a middle ground and say, I can rest here in the center, right in the middle, and I don't need to pick a side. I can just show love to all things. Where I see someone who's acting out in anger and hatred and hurting another, let me see that hurt within them is something that they don't really want either, and that they need love to shine into that hurt so that they can finally see themselves for who they are and make those changes. If we always treat those who are seemingly unworthy and dark and evil and all these things, if we treat them according to how they think they should be treated, or the way the society tells us we should treat them, we're just going to keep perpetuating the cycle. We slow down our brothers and sisters' awakening when we do not pour out love. And that's something that's really central to A Course in Miracles. Is the whole first section of it deals with how love is the miracle in action. And when we show love to people, we accelerate the time that it takes for them to awaken. We're not actually in charge of the specific miracles, but when we love, we create the energetic pathway for those miracles to flow. And essentially, Yeshua was saying, I'm actually in charge of a lot of these miracles. There probably are assigned souls that do intercede in these direct ways, and Yeshua was one that had already advanced way up the cycles. They were on like the 6th density, I think was the way it was described in one channeling. Actually, I think that was actually the Ra channelings. I don't know if I've talked about the Law of One or Ra too much. It's been a while since I've actually read all of it, but they were describing Yeshua as a 6th density entity who saw all of the pain and suffering here and the cycles of war and just misunderstanding, and wanted to help us awaken to what we really are. So Source sent Yeshua on a mission to come here and literally hold up a mirror to us and show us our own divinity. But of course, we were so mired in ego and warring and judgment and all of this nonsensical lawmaking against each other that Yeshua's words were very, very confused and misunderstood and written down very scattershot and often inaccurately. So we get these little fragments in the Bible, I believe, of the message of Yeshua that you can also find in so many other holy scriptures that Buddha or Shiva or many of these other essentially teachers of the same message were trying to get these ideas through, and yet humanity was too flawed to really interpret the message purely, because we have all this extreme ego dominating our thoughts, screaming in our ears. And so it's taken a long time for a lot of those words to sink in and those messages to sink in, but they're universally the same, that we're all the same, we're all one, and when we pick extremes, we work against ourselves. We work against the beauty and divinity that we truly are. We just have infinite creative abilities, and I'm saying this so much from my head because I'm internalizing all these other people's experiences. And that's so unscientific, and the atheist me from a few years back would have been mortified at some of the concepts I'm embracing, absolutely gobsmacked that I would go back to using terms like the Holy Spirit or talking about Yeshua in a very affirming way. But I still maintain that the Bible is a deeply flawed book that bears all of the marks of humanity, but also bears a lot of sort of sparsely peppered in nuggets of truth that came through. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong way to interpret, all these books unless you're drawing the conclusion that we were made to judge each other, or that the thing that made us wants to cut some of us down and exalt others of us. There's just a lot of deeply humanistic thinking attached to it that you have to take it with a grain of salt, just like anyone else who feels inspired to share something like myself. I might be saying many, many truths peppered in with so many of my own judgments and opinions that I've kind of recycled into something that maybe sounds appealing or reasonable. But I'm not under any illusion that I'm somehow ascendant beyond the human mind and the limitations of the ego. I'm finding new ways to balance it, but I'm also nowhere close to what I envision in my heart, in terms of the person I want to be in the world. So part of the reason for this podcast is for me to just kind of push that momentum forward in my heart, that I'm not here just to swipe through my phone for hours and feel misery for the world and do jack shit about it other than make my family and friends miserable by replaying the horrors for them. I'm here to express the love energy that I was created from. And within that, I'm allowed to do whatever the hell I want to do. And that's a beautiful and terrifying thing, that we have the power to do whatever the hell we want to do. And we can bring hell to earth. We can create hell when we act out of our despair, our anger, and the lower parts of, the more extreme parts of the ego. We can also bring heaven to earth. Now, I've heard people talk about this in a very interesting way, that when there is a critical mass of people on this earth who have awakened to the fact that we have the creative abilities within us to make the world we want to live in, and that we want to live in a world that is filled with love and not judgment and not separation and not seeing others for even the smallest difference as outside of us, that's when the real good stuff starts happening. That's when Earth becomes a paradise. The actual physical Earth will ascend into a new form, and we will ascend in our understanding of, again, why it makes no sense to create any artificial separation between ourselves and anything. It could be yourself and the dog, yourself and your bass guitar. I'm just looking at stuff in my room. I'm trying to embrace this idea that everything is source, everything is valuable and equal. And of course, on one scale, I think the experiences of human being are maybe a little more profound. The soul behind it are maybe a little more profound than a plastic cup that we made. But at the same time, all of those, you have to look at it or at least the way I'm looking at it, is that everything that is here was allowed by love, that the source love energy. So everything that we've created is a result of that access to love. Now, does it mean that we're never going to miscreate and that we're never going to make something pretty awful out of the choices available? No, we have to kind of fuck around and find out. And then once we do that, we realize that, of course we're not going to do this. Of course we wouldn't see each other as different. That makes zero sense. That was just an odd game we used to teach ourselves a lesson that, again, I don't understand. I don't know how to articulate the meaning or point of so many of these lessons, but I'm trusting that there's going to be a lot more that makes sense when I'm not limited to a human animal. The 98.8% chimp in me is very, very much trying to divide things into a tribalistic viewpoint. and to separate things out so that I can optimize my survival. That's one thing that really stood out to me in the Yeshua channelings with Pamela Cribbo, was that Yeshua said that we've gotten really, really good at surviving, but we basically lost our ability to live. And I've always felt that on a deep level, that we're just artificially extending our lives. We always herald about science is now allowing us to live 40, 50, 60 years longer than we used to. But at what quality level? I'm seeing artificially extended lives that seem very miserable. People I've loved and known who, it looked like you just had to watch them endure a torture chamber for the last X amount of years of their life. And honestly, I don't really know that that's what we're here to do either. I don't think we're here to just... And a lot of that I feel like is tied into a fear of death. People are able to live very long lives too when they're so afraid of death that they are just desperately clinging on to this because it's all they know, and they're afraid that what if they were wrong about a religion, and what if they're going to go to a certain hell. There's a lot of reasons that we artificially extend our lives, but I think a lot of it too is very monetarily based. That's part of my old cynical take on a lot of things, that we're being pushed into these very artificial long lives to prop up industries and elites. But I just resonated so much when Yeshua was like, yeah, you guys are doing a great job of adding years to your life, but your years are pretty crap. And of course he didn't say that exactly, but essentially, yeah, we've got it all backwards. We should be living these rich, full, beautiful, expressive lives and not being concerned about the longevity, because we don't ever lose anybody. Even our family and friends, as much as that sucks to not have them in our immediate lives anymore, we don't lose anybody. No one is gone. They're just temporarily outside of our perception. They're still right here with us. Everybody you've ever loved and known who's died is literally watching you and cheering for you at every turn. They're not off in some distant galaxy far away where they have no concept of what you're doing. That's something that has been very consistent with the NDEs as well. And it's something I experienced with my brother when he died, and I felt enormous pain that what if he went to hell? What if he didn't pray his sinner's prayer with a fervent heart? Surely he did the right thing though, right? He said the right words. But then I had this beautiful dream of him a couple days after he died where he was completely healed. He looked like his best self that I remembered from before his accident. And he sat up on the table, had this amazingly warm, loving smile that I'd only seen on him a few times in my life. And he stood up and he walked towards me and he hugged me and he said, I'm okay, man. And I woke up from that dream just thinking, what a beautiful thing. And then as the day wore on, I just remember thinking, you know what, man, that's your wishful thinking. You have no idea. Dreams are just random. At the time I was like, dreams are just a smattering of subconsciousness that has nothing to do with anything meaningful, except for what we want it to be sometimes, and other times the opposite of what we want it to be. But you know what? I realized how chaotic the vast majority of my dreams are and how crystal clear and distilled this one is. I can still remember it. Some of the finer details are a little more fuzzy, but I can still remember him exactly laying on that stone table and just sitting up very kind of, it felt like a movie, just sitting up straight and smiling and extending his heart towards me. And I truly believe that was a real experience, and that he's never departed from the perception of me, of our family, of my loved ones. He's with me in a way now that's more real than when he was on this earth. And the only one who's sad is us, who are left behind. So I hope that's some comfort if you've lost someone really close, especially in the last few years. Things have been especially hard, and there's just been a lot of disease and tragedy, and it can feel so hopeless when we lose those anchors in our life. And my brother was my only sibling, and there's no one else in my family that I have to really confide in easily. In my immediate family, Thankfully, My wife and I have developed that over the years, and I'm very open with my children because I want them to learn to express themselves in a unique way and not to feel pigeonholed into you got to be this or you got to be that. We're very, I hope, reasonable with them on the ideas of their education and college and future careers. Things are so upside down right now that there's just no way for me to give them some BS, well, you got to prepare you for the world and you got to do X, Y, and Z or else you're not going to be prepared. Like, come on. I'm still a 41-year-old man-child who doesn't really know what I want to be when I grow up. So what business do I have telling my teenage daughters exactly what they need to be? I want to see them embrace who they are inside of themselves, that deep light within them, that love that I know they can find for themselves, that we all have available to us, that you don't have to feel like some weirdo or cheeseball looking in the mirror and saying, "You're awesome. I love you. You're incredible. You have the fullness of the divinity of Source within you, and you have the energy of the solution to the problems that you experience in this life. You came here with the energy of the solution. You just have to trust that, and you have to trust that your path is never going to be this linear, obvious thing. It's going to require a lot of leading with your heart and putting yourself out there. But when we do that, we connect to things that are so far beyond the temporary excitement of the ego and all the trappings within that. So when someone backs you in a corner when you are expressing yourself and saying, well, that's not really an option. You've got to be A or B. You've got to pick one side or the other, or else you're harming our cause. That's an opportunity to say, I respect that that's your opinion about how I need to proceed, but I see a different way. I see that there is not black or white, but there is every color in the spectrum in between, and colors we haven't even seen yet that exist, that we can explore and create. There literally is no limit. And so when we limit ourselves to these binary, polarizing choices, we act in complete opposition to our true nature. And I hope that more and more I can internalize that, and that hopefully you will have the same inclination. But your journey is your journey, and your path is yours alone, and you may be resonating with a whole different set of ideas and a trajectory that looks very different from what I'm discussing or describing or prescribing. That's the beauty of it. We're all off on our own wildly unique path. So let's stop trying to size each other up, put each other in boxes, decide for the other person what they are. Let's allow each other to be exactly as we are, and just put love out there and allow the rest to fall into place, because we don't really need to set agendas or control anything when we let love lead the way. I have a few examples of this that I'm not going to get into, but just ones that are in my head of people I know that are really embracing love on a level that I can't quite even fathom myself. Putting themselves out there in the world in a way that's so vulnerable and so potentially open to judgment and criticism. And it's incredible to see them push beyond that after so many difficult experiences of internalizing that judgment, and then finally realizing I don't owe anyone anything. I am a completely free and unique creature. And when you live out that in love, people are just drawn to it. You don't have to shout it from the rooftops or be evangelical about it. People are just drawn to your light and your love. We're designed that way. We're designed to attract others to our light like a lighthouse. But at the same time, there are going to be many ships that are traveling in other directions that don't need to head towards that light. They have a light that's much further in the distance that they will see illuminated in their own time. So let's not force each other either into an awakening that isn't necessarily available yet. But again, I get back to that idea in Course in Miracles where love is the miracle that shortens the time of our awakening. So we can, by putting love out there, shorten the time for our soul brothers and sisters to awaken to their own light. But our goal really should be awakening of ourself. That was something in the Yeshua channelings that really stood out, was You're not here to save the world or really anyone else. You're ultimately here just to awaken to your own light. That's the objective. That's it. Beyond that, do whatever you want. I think Yeshua said that with a little bit of a, I could see a sly grin of like, but, you'll want to save the world. You'll want to spread that love around just naturally. The nature of love is not to be contained; it's to be given freely. So that's kind of the beauty of it. Is the inbuilt nature of love is to freely express it and give it out without any concern about how it's perceived or if there's any judgment coming back. Because real love cannot be harmed by any countering viewpoint, because love knows that that is not even a real thing. That love is the only actual reality that exists, period. And I take so much comfort in that, knowing that I don't have to be shoved into A or B, because the center point is love. It's the acceptance of all things as they are and allowing all things to be as Source allowed them to be for each soul's unique path. So the next time, again, you get pushed into a corner by somebody and they tell you to decide A or B, reframe it. Flip it back on them and say, who told you you had to choose A or B? Oh yeah, well, who told them that? And you can apply that to a lot of different scenarios. That's interesting. Where did you hear that? And who do you think told them that? You don't want to be smug and condescending. I'm not saying trot that out every time someone shares a tidbit with you, because it can sound like you're asserting that, well, I'm not dumb enough to believe that. We might need to internalize that monologue a little bit more and not allow the ones we care about to wound us with their own ego misadventures. Again, we need to see that pain as coming from a place of a universal pain we all share, which is that when we came here and separated from we gave ourselves the illusion that we separated from our source, we felt all this pain, and pretty much every negative action we undertake in these bodies is a result of that birth of separation. And like a baby being born in this world, it fucking hurts to be separated from that cozy warmth. When we're in the womb, we're just surrounded by this, and of course, in an idyllic scenario, we're surrounded in this cocoon of warmth and comfort, and we're not really conscious yet. We're not fully activated and aware. We're just sort of hanging out in this blissful state. And that's kind of what we're doing back home in spirit. We're just hanging out in this really kind of blissful state, almost dormant in this perfect love. And so I guess we got a little bored and wanted to come here. And just like a baby being born, you leave that comfort of the womb and it's terrifying. You're screaming. There's people in funny clothes doing weird things to you, and you're seeing all these people and you're ingesting all this stuff that's completely foreign. You don't understand what is going on. And objectively, you can look at that and go, who wants to go through that? That's terrible. That's a traumatizing experience. And there are a lot of people who carry birth traumas with them for a long time. But most of us, and even those who carry those traumas, have the access to finding a way through that, and then a way to embrace this whole other reality in their life. They can now create their own children, and they can do as they please. They're not bound by the stage they were at when they were an infant and they were helpless. And that's kind of, I think, a metaphor for our spiritual birth into this world. We come here naked and confused and screaming like a baby, what the hell is this? And it takes us a long time to sort of work through the terrible twos and then the middle school years. Eesh. No judgment. They're just hard years, okay? Especially I just shouldn't say especially for women in school, but just I have daughters, so I'm biased. But yeah, it's rough out there. But then me and my wife are trying to constantly encourage them with is, you're not bound to the experiences of school. The popularity stuff, the academics, those are all just part of this kind of weird simulation to place you in society's expectations of where you should land. But they don't define you as a person. And your mom and I certainly don't judge you by your abilities or lack of abilities academically, because it is such a left-brained, weird system. But again, like us going through this really difficult stage of the physical, once you finally get through that very uncomfortable transition, now you're an adult. Now you are a soul operating from the heart, not the ego. And so you see how there's those parallels, right? And now we're able to create our own reality and do as we please. Once we let go of all the expectations that mom and dad had for us and our pastors and, all those things, then we're allowed to be who we truly want to be. And some of us embrace that on a very, very profound level. Myself, not as much. I've kind of done the stifled life bit for a long time, trying to be a better husband and father, but in some ways I've really shortchanged what makes me tick and what makes me creative and expressive. And I used to blame the wrong people for that. My wife or pastors or people who misled me in some way, and just played the victim and decided that this is all happening to me and doesn't make any sense, and I just want it to go away and be over with. But man, what a power in reclaiming that I forged my own destiny. And it almost led to a divorce, because I was kind of on this path of I need to be free and be me to the fullest and not be restricted by anybody or anything. But then I realized that was the ego running away with this idea of, hey, we can do whatever the hell we want. Let's get out of here. But then I realized what I really want is to make the things work in my life that were a struggle and that I was basically approaching so wrong for so long. Sorry for the rhyme. And so I wanted to be able to re-engage with the things in my life that I was running from, but with a totally new perspective. And it's been liberating and also extremely difficult. We definitely have had some of the highest highs. I should say my wife and I have had some of the highest highs in our marriage after some of these catastrophic experiences where things were almost over with us. And because there was a lot that we had to reframe that was so ingrained into our upbringing that we were programmed to believe about how a husband and wife should function and how we should relate to each other. It was so based on expectations versus appreciating and accepting each other as we are. And that's a lifelong journey. I mean, that's, again, part of the wheel we're on, is trying to balance ego and spirit, trying to just give love freely without expecting anything back. I'm still so far behind on that. When I give and show affection to somebody in love, there's a part of me that kind of wants some of it back and might feel a little bit hurt if I don't receive it. But then I realize how transactional and selfish that is. In fact, that reminds me of, there's some painful memories in there too, and this is somebody I've actually had to kind of cut out of my life for some difficult reasons. But when I was 16, I was in a rock band called Librium, and it was a project that was already a couple years in. The band had been together. They just had a flaky drummer, and they needed a new drummer, and they were recording a new album. And my dad happened to know a guy who knew the people who ran the studio. I don't even know how the conversation got there. I think my dad just said, "Oh, my son plays drums." And this guy's like, "Oh, I know a band that's looking for a drummer." So I show up after only 2 years of drums with my really, really rinky-dink drum set. I had written on the cover of the kick drum head Ringo and then a really shitty-looking star. And I roll into this really nice studio in Tacoma, Washington with my Ringo star, like my first drum kit. I think they were like, okay, who is this kid? But then I started playing, and they're like, oh, he actually can hold a beat and has some kind of decent instinct here. So they decided they wanted to let me give it a try, and we plowed through a couple songs, and I tried to record stuff for the album. And like the first month I was in the band, and it went terribly. It was awful. But then we practiced like 3 times a week for months. And then when we came back in, I was nailing the takes in, 30 minutes versus 5 hours of garbage. But I'll never forget one of the things that the lead singer had said to me when we were out to dinner one time, and I was probably complaining about the direction of the music or the recording process. That's a whole other story. But I remember him saying very cynically that love is selfish. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, think about it. Any relationship you're in, you're only doing it because you're expecting to get something back, whether it's sex or attention or affection. I was like, oh, damn, he's right. We are looking at love in a very transactional way. And the irony is he never really shook that. That was a big part of our falling out when we kind of reconnected over the last few years was he kept trying to bring up the past, very painful things that were happening in the short year that I was in that band. And we finished the album. We got to play our CD release show, and that was it for me. But there were some really, really dark things that happened in between there, and he kept bringing them up, and I just kept telling him, I don't want to relive the past. We've already done this. Please don't bring up traumas that I've put in the rearview mirror. But he insisted on bringing them up over and over, and I had to block him off of my phone and social media, and that I really don't like doing that, but I've had to do that with a few people lately that I'm not, and I say lately in the last few years. And again, that seems very judgmental, right? Very determinative of like, I reject you. We are allowed to set boundaries too about what energy we allow in our life. And there are going to be people in our lives that are just constantly dumping negative energy and don't know how to turn it off. And we've established a feedback loop with them where we're just exchanging negative energy. And then at a certain point, someone has to make the call, all right, if you're not going to change, I'm trying to change and I can't keep inviting this negativity or whatever. I love you, I care about you, and this is something I wish I had done better, was communicating that to people. But sometimes it's hard to do that. You just have to, they're not going to understand, they're going to take it poorly, and you just have to cut things off. So I've had to do that with a few people. A lot of Christians, when I left the faith, it was a long, slow process of finding out that it's so ingrained to, I love using that word, I guess, but it was such a theme that people who claim they would never forsake you or leave you, that your brothers and sisters from the church, as soon as you step away from the church, they just ghost you. The pastor, everybody just ghosts you. They want nothing to do with you because the Bible makes it very clear to them that they have every right to cast you out and to turn you over to Satan. And I've heard that quote a lot. There is no hate quite like Christian love. And while that really is, maybe a little extreme, there's times I've felt that on a very deep level. So, you know what? Don't pick a side. When someone pressures you into it, say, nope, I don't need to do that. I'm content in my own choices. I don't need to broadcast them or run them by anyone else for approval. I know within myself what is right to me and what resonates with love, and I'm going to run with that. And of course, be sensitive. People might be able to point out something that you have a blind spot to. I'm not saying just tell people, no, thank you, I don't want your opinion, but just say, I don't believe I need to be herded into one extreme or the other. And with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and call it. I hope that, again, this was beneficial in some way or coherent in some way. My mind is a little bit of a wild mess that I'm still trying to distill down into a more organized pathway, but I've had so much rattling around with all of my judgments and frustrations that it's taking time to untangle that web. But the more I do, the more clarity I find. The less I feel conflicted about what I'm putting out there. And what I'm putting out there is my very flawed, specific interpretation of events and reality as I see it. It's not, again, meant for you to internalize word for word or thought for thought. Find whatever stuck out to you and run with that. And whatever sounded like absolute nonsense, well, try and give me a little grace if you can. You don't have to, but just ignore it. There's no pressure. There's no reason to, and I'm not expecting people to report back to me and tell me how everything I'm saying is resonant and great. I expect to hear some critical feedback too. In fact, if I don't, I'll be a little surprised that people aren't maybe being as honest as they could be, or maybe they're just finally embracing that love energy too, where they don't feel the need to necessarily criticize, but we can still bring correction to each other in love. That just takes a lot of practice and understanding how to approach people in a way that communicates, I just care about you and I'm going to accept you no matter what the outcome is here, but here's what I think maybe you should try and do. And if you don't do it, I'm not going to reject you. I'm not going to say, well, I just can't be with someone who isn't willing to do this for themselves, All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up here. And if you have anything you want to add, a story that you want to share, maybe just privately or on the podcast, or, you have critical or positive feedback for me, I'm open to anything you want to send me, within reason. Don't send me spam and viruses, please. You have the keys, 639@gmail.com. And I hope that you remember as I sign off today that the world is not happening to you. The world is happening for you. Go in love and namaste.